Okay guys, we have a 2007 Pontiac Solstice Ecotech 2.0, the turbo version, with what we believe to be a timing chain slap sound. I don't have any kind of check engine light or anything showing on the inside saying that there's anything wrong, but it's just a noise. So I'll start it up, let you hear the sound. Okay, so we'll start it up. All right, so the first thing we want to do is pop this cover off, and we're going to try to find the two VVT solenoids, variable valve timing solenoids, and get those removed, which I think is underneath some insulation that we need to get out first. And we'll try to pull those out and check the condition of the screens on these solenoids. Okay, so from the passenger side here, you can see how this insulation just kind of goes all around everything, and it's pretty involved to get it off. You got to remove all these wires here, clips, and then it'll come off the oil cap. You can, by lifting this up here, there's our two solenoids right there, 1 and 2, right down in there. There's a nut. Or not a nut, but a bolt on each one of these. It's a 10 millimeter that you remove this wiring clip, and then you can get a pair of pliers or something to twist these out and pop them out. You can do that without taking off that insulation. I guess we can go ahead and do that just in case they're completely clean. To go to the next step, which is take the valve cover off, you got to have this off anyway. So let's just go ahead and take one of the solenoids out. Okay, so to get these clips off, you pull this gray piece up, and that allows you to be able to push in on this tab, and it releases that, okay? And it's not real easy, but go ahead and get this other one off, hopefully. You got a purple and a gray, and I think they only will go one way. So your gray tip goes on the gray bottom. This other one is black, and that's where the purple one goes. So let's just get these out of our way a little bit. Get in there and get our 10 millimeter socket. Okay, there it's loose. There it goes. All right, so we'll see what this screen looks like. Okay, so if you can see it or not, the screen is really not clogged at all. The videos I've seen, screens look way worse than that. I don't see anything clogging that up. So we need to go one more step. We'll go ahead and take the other one off, and we'll replace these since we've got them out. And then we'll go ahead and take off the valve cover and look down there and see if we can inspect the timing chain, see how much slack it's got, and if we see any broken guides. Okay, here's our other one. Very clean. Little tiny bit of stuff right here, but nothing like I've seen in other videos. So let's keep on digging. I'm gonna go ahead and mark these. This little piece of tape. 1, 2, 3, 4, so I know which, I don't know if it matters which one you put it back in the same spot or not, but I'm gonna go ahead and mark them just so I have everything back the exact same way it was. There's 11 bolts holding on this valve cover. There's one right here on the inside. That's the only hard one to get to. They would probably have to have an end wrench. The rest of them are just right on the outside edge. And we've got a little connection here and here that we're going to have to take off. Remove. This one's just going into this intake pipe. Okay, so I've got all 11 bolts out around the valve cover. Everything's off. The only thing, I've even got this bolt out. Probably can't see it, but there's a hole right down here where the end of this hose goes into the turbo. And there's a bolt right there. I got it out. I had to use a little articulating U-joint socket to get the bolt out. But then this thing is like, I think it's just like a nipple with an O-ring on it or something down to the turbo, and it is in there. I mean, I'm having a really hard time getting that pulled out. I know it just pulls straight out, but you have a hard time getting a good angle to get it pulled straight out. So I'm still working on that. I went ahead and took the turbo tube off of there just so I can get to it better. And then I also realized that my other line that goes over here into the intake was broke before I ever had it, so I need to replace this tube here. So I'll check and find one of those. But for now, I'll go ahead and try to get this off, and then we can get this cover off and see what our chain looks like. Okay, I finally got it out, and it's just a matter of just grabbing onto it with some pliers up here and just wiggling until it finally pops out. But man, it is really in there. So now I can get the valve cover off. So let's see what's under there. So before you start this project, make sure you've got valve cover gaskets ordered, because you'll want to replace all that while you're in there. And 2 new solenoids. And I just found this on one of these gaskets. Got a little piece of metal right there. That's not a good sign. So the first thing we'll look at is the slack in the chain. And that's not supposed to be slack in the chain. And it's very slack. Once you start it, there's something in there that expands and tightens that up. But I want to try to shoot a light down in there, see if we can see the valve guides. And shoot another light down just straight in this hole here to see if we see anything broken down in there. So I cannot see anything amiss down in there at first inspection. I don't see any broken pieces down in there. The guides are both still there. There's one guide. You can see the chains are on the guides. I don't see anything broken. Looks like the bolt that people have trouble with coming out is still there. There's nothing I can see wrong, so I'm hoping it's just a stretched out chain. And then I can just get in there and replace everything. And you may notice I went ahead and took this hood off. I've got it laying up over there. And I'm going to go ahead and remove this front bumper. I don't think the front bumper needs to be removed, but I need to do it I've got a broken spot up underneath. I'm doing on another project. I need to go ahead and get it off and out of the way. So I'll try to get a lot of this stuff out of the way so that we can really get a good camera shot in there about what we're doing on that front cover. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I got the bumper off. I'm going to go ahead and try to remove all this air box stuff. Remember, I've got to find a new pipe because that fitting was broken off. So I'm just going to remove it down there at that clamp going into the turbo. And then I'll see what's involved getting all the rest of this off. Once we get that big pile of plastic off of there, we should be able to see more what's going on underneath there. All right, I'm pretty deep into this. It's just a bunch of taking out little bolts and screws. So the thing I don't want to do is discharge the AC. So I want to make sure I leave the condenser on here and connected to all its hoses and stuff. So I'm going to try to get enough bolts out to where I've got some slack where I can move that forward. I'll go ahead and drain the radiator and remove it, try to remove it and the fan. Then I'll have probably a foot between the condenser and the where I need to get to on that front engine cover. Okay, so I think I've got to the point where I can reach everything. So the next step would be to get the belts off. We've got this little power steering belt down here, the little tiny belt. There's our power steering pump right back there. We should be able to just slide this belt. I don't think there's a whole lot of tension on that. We should be able to slide this forward, get it off that tensioner and take it off. And then our drive belt, the big one, we've got a little 3/8 inch square hole right here that a socket or a ratchet will fit into with a little extension. We'll pull that up and get the tension off of that belt, and we should be able to get that off. And then we'll have to try to get the crankshaft pulley off. They used to call these harmonic balancers. I don't know if they still do because this doesn't look like a weighted harmonic balancer, but it might be. So let's get this stuff off. Okay, so slide this belt off of this little tensioner. Very easy. That belt comes off. And then I've got a 3/8 drive ratchet here, which gives me slack in that hole. And that comes off pretty easy. Okay, so I'm going to try to use an impact to get this bolt off. And sometimes some people say they can get this thing slid off just with wiggling it, trying to get it wiggled off. And some people say they have to get a puller. So we'll see. Bolt's loose. All right, so I went and got you can rent these from your local like O'Reilly's or something. They're just a little rental puller. And I'm going to leave my bolt in. I'm going to put this little nut on the end of my puller. If you can see, there's a little pointed nipple on there that normally goes to the end of a shaft. But since I'm using my nut, I don't want to grind off the little nipple off of their puller. So I'm just going to put a little nut on there so it's got a flat surface to push against. All right, so I've got it all set in there. My jaws are all in there tight. Okay, I feel it's loose now. You have the right tools, things go so much easier. Take the nut off, or the bolt off. Big old bolt. And here comes the pulley. Go ahead and remove this tensioner. I'm not sure we really had to move that tensioner. That might just be bolted into the cover. But now we're going to start removing all these 10mm bolts and get this cover off so we can see what's going on in there finally. I finally got this thing loose. One thing I had to do was take this little small tensioner for the power steering pump. I had to take it off to get a little bit more room in there. And then there is a little stud. Let me get this off. It sticks out right here. I don't know if you can see it or not, but that was what was holding me from getting it straight out. So, okay guys, so here's the problem we found right here. That is our chain tensioner. It goes right here, as you can see, it broke off, so it went like that. And it's our balance shaft. I think that's what you call it, chain. It's not even the timing chain, which the timing chain needs to be replaced because we had that slack in it, but we'll replace all that. We'll get a parts list together, consult the guys on the Solstice forum, get all that stuff ordered. So I'll see you in a few days. All right, guys, it's been a few days, and I got a few parts in, a lot of parts in, which I'm not going to go over with you yet because I want to talk to you a little bit. One thing that everyone says, if you're this far, it's the old adage, well, I'm this far, I might as well do blank. Here we have the water pump, the infamous bad water pumps on these Ecotech engines. And if you're this far and you're into it this far, they say you probably really need to just go ahead and change that because it's going to go bad anyway, and that's going to save somebody in the future a lot of headache. I went ahead and bought one. That's what's in that AC Delco box right there. The way to get that out, we've kind of got the issue with the sprocket on the inside. Hooking up to the chain in the right spot is not an issue once you have all this part where we are now. So that's kind of half the battle. We're not going to have to deal with hooking a special tool up to this sprocket and holding it exactly where it goes while you take the water pump out the back side of the engine, because we have access to everything. So, but to get to that water pump, to get it out, it is down there. You can see where that top of that acorn is, where a mouse must have been at one time, or a squirrel. To get that out, water pump is connected here. There's a pipe that goes from there all the way over to this other side where there's a thermostat. You have to get the thermostat off, to get that pipe off, to get the water pump off. And to reach any of that stuff, you almost have to get the catalytic converter off, which is right here. And then to see stuff really easily, it helps to get the turbo off. So there is just a whole lot of stuff that's in the way, so that we're going to be kind to the next owner of this vehicle by removing and replacing that water pump. And it makes for a good video, I guess, to learn and figure out how all this goes together. But what we really need to do is, I'm going to take this little shield off, and we'll jack the car up where we've got some room under there, and take the bottom, whatever's, I guess, the exhaust off the bottom of that catalytic converter, and then try to get the catalytic converter out, and then the turbo, and then we'll see if we can get the thermostat off and go from there. Okay, so I got the shield off, and I'm removing the nuts on the catalytic converter just to get everything loose. And while you've got it on there still tight, I went ahead and removed the sensor. So, there's something to hold it while you're trying to get that out. So I just unscrewed that from this hole right here. And these nuts are on there, tight. So I've gotten 2 of them all the way off. This one's loose. You see that one down at the bottom. That one is, you have to have some kind of a long wrench with a box end on it. So I'm going to see, like, just a regular old wrench. You don't have enough grip, and there's not enough travel. So you need the box end of it. But it needs to be a thin, like this, but it needs to be long. So this is just a regular wrench, and it's not long enough to reach down in there. So I'm going to see if I can find it's a 15 millimeter long end wrench like that I can reach down in there. So that's one special tool you probably have to have this job to do this job. Okay, so I could not find the wrench I needed at my local auto parts store, and I didn't want to order it and wait. So I found another way to do this. You can get a 3/8 drive ratchet, put your 15 millimeter socket on it, and go down through this hole. If you have I think it's about a 3-inch extension, and it will fit on there. And you can still get it through here. And I even put a pipe on the end of my ratchet through there and was able to break it free. So once it's broke loose, you can use a regular, just like gear wrench, get it the rest of the way. Okay, so once I get that off, I'm going to jack the car up and start working underneath. Okay, so I've got the two nuts off of the exhaust coming down off the cat. And once you take those two nuts off the cat or the exhaust, you can just lay it on the ground. You do have to remove this sensor plug, just unplug it up there, and then the wire just follows it down. Then there's two other bolts from here and here that you have to remove off this bracket to get the cat free. Okay, so now it's just loose, but it is, I don't see a way to get it out of this hole yet, so I'm going to continue to take some stuff off, like this bracket here. I think there's two bolts holding that on. That might let us be able to turn it some, but it is really tight in there, and it's kind of heavy, so it's hard to get moved around. So I'm going to remove some more stuff, and then we'll see if we can fish it out of there. Okay, so the cat is out of the bag. And here it is. And the only way I was able to do it, I got that bracket out of the way, which is right here. Remove that bracket, and there's also a bracket, a long skinny one that goes up, which is right there. That goes up to this bolt here, which is, the nut is very hard to get off, all the heat. You have to turn the cat 90 degrees this way once you get some room, and then it'll seem like it wants to come out, but it will not come out. At least I couldn't get it to. So what I had to do was that bolt right down there, which is the engine mount bolt. Take that nut off and get a jack. I put a little 2x4 on there, just on that side of the engine, underneath the engine mount, and I jacked it up about an inch, and that thing almost just fell out. Once you get it turned 90 degrees, it's got room to get out. So now the next step is to get the 4 bolts. I think there's 4 nuts holding the turbo onto the exhaust. Get those broke loose. Then we'll take this 1, 2, 3 lines off here. The oil line is here. This is coolant, and this is coolant. So 2 coolant lines and 1 oil. And there is a way to get this off without removing the turbo. I just think it's going to be easier to remove the turbo to get it out of the way, but some people leave the turbo in and remove the cover from the water pump. There's 4, I think there's 4 or 5 bolts holding the cover on, and you can get the cover off and then remove the water pump with the turbo still in there. But either way, you have to get the thermostat housing area off, which I'm going to try another way here in just a second. I'm going to try to get this section right here off the thermostat. You can see it is right there, that round thing. That's where the thermostat housing is. Well, it's attached to all that with the pipes right in there, right there. So I think there's 3 bolts holding that section on. You have to get it off because there's a pipe going from that to the water pump. You can see that pipe right in there, down there. We have to remove that section to get enough slack to get the pipe out, to get the water pump out. So all that is so tight in there, I think it's just easier to get the turbo out. But either way, I'm going to go ahead and get the turbo out, but then I'm going to try to remove that piece enough to just loosen it up and move it back without taking the thermostat housing and hoses and all that stuff off. So we'll see if that works. Okay, so from looking from up from underneath, there's the bottom of the turbo, and there's the 4 bolts. You can see I need to remove, they're going to the exhaust. So there's one way over in that corner behind there, and then these other 3 are really easy to get to. I don't think that other will be too bad. So that's really all that's holding that on, other than the lines going to it. So I'll remove those and then show you when it's out of the way. All right, so that 1 bolt on the flange, going from the exhaust manifold to the turbo, is the only way to get that bolt is from the top. So on the top of the engine, I got an extension, about a 3-inch extension in there, and you can get it on there underneath that rod on the turbo. All right, so I've got those 4 nuts off underneath. Now I'm just gonna take these lines off, and I think there's one more hose that goes somewhere down there into the back of that thing. I'm not gonna know until I can get it back and get it off. And I also have this one little line right here. Just need to take the clamp off. So I'll go ahead and do that. And remember, when you break this line right here, either one of these coolant lines, you're going to get some, whatever coolant's left in the system is going to come out. So I have a bucket underneath it. And that's even after I had the radiator out. So most of the coolant's out of the car, but there's still some in there. All right, so I've got the turbo off of the studs. I just got it laying there. There's one hose, the one on the right to the left of the motor mount down there. I think that's an oil line, and it bolts into the bottom of the turbo. Very hard to see. If I can leave that turbo in there and just move it back and forth, like to get the water pump out and the housing over here out, then I'll do that. And if I still have a hard time getting it out, then I'll try to get underneath there and try to figure out how to get that other hose disconnected. But I've got quite a bit of travel. I can move it around. So next step, I'm going to go ahead and try to get the bolts out of that, which the first thing I got to do is get the that little sensor out because it's in front of that bolt. So I'll get that out, and we'll start taking those 3 bolts out, see if we can move it enough to get the pipe out. Okay, so there is not enough space in there to get that pipe out without going ahead and removing all that junk back there, which means we have to remove this cowl. We have to remove the wiper blades. So let's get started doing that. I think there's 6 bolts in there. I take the wiper arms off, and there's a bunch of these little clips. When that comes off, then we can get to the hoses. We can hopefully remove, and there's a bolt on the other side of that thermostat housing, way on the back side, that's almost impossible to get to. We'll see if we can just get the hoses off and get the whole thing out as a unit, but if not, we'll have to get that out. Okay, so I have that plastic piece off, and I got both of these hoses off. So now I'm going to really just need to leave that thermostat housing right there in there if you can, because those hoses are going to be hard to get off. So if I can reach that one bolt, which I don't think will be a problem on this side, but then there's another one. It's way down in there. Anyway, I'm going to try to get it out, and if you're doing this, you'll be able to find it. Okay, so I finally got that back screw out, and the only way that I was able to do it, I had to reach my hand down around through here and around the back with a, like that, with a wrench. That's a ratchet style, and I could pull this away from the housing enough to get it started and just get like a quarter of a turn every time until it finally got it off. So front part will be easy. Then once I get that loose, I should be able to move that out and get the pipe out. All right, so here's the piece finally out. There's the thermostat, so we'll definitely replace that while we have it out. And you can see these hoses have, or this whole tube has a O-ring here and one that goes up in there. So I'll take that out and clean it before we put it all back. And there's also a little tab for this hose that has to fit, or this tube that goes up into this housing right there to orient it. So now we can start working on getting the water pump out finally. Okay, and before I do anything with the water pump, you remember that the chain is still in here. So there's the water pump, the chain is still connected to it. So at this point, we can go ahead and start working on doing the timing chain removal, getting all that stuff out, so that we can go ahead and, once we get all that out, we can get the water pump out and replaced before we start putting the timing chain, all the tensioners and all that stuff back in. So I'm going to start all this part of the process by going over parts. Okay, so first thing I want to mention is that the Solstice forum is your #1 thing to go to before you start this process. There's guys on there that have done this before. There's a ton of information. I mean, just a wealth of information. And Andy will put the link to the Solstice forum right here. And you can go there and just check it all out. I mean, it's just amazing what all those guys know about a Solstice. And really this goes to any or most, 2.0, 2.4 Ecotech engines. I'll just kind of go over what parts I've got. I've got the valve cover, gasket. I've got the harmonic balancer bolt, main seal, sprocket. These are the little timing guide bolts, which I'll show you later. We're only going to use 2 of these because of this. This is something that the guys on the forum told me about. This will replace one of these bolts, and will ward off the problem that a lot of people have had with these bolts coming out while the engine's running and tearing up stuff. And so this will replace that. This is our gasket for the timing chain cover. There's our water pump. And this is the timing chain kit with all this stuff in it. And I'll break it down here in a minute and show you what's in there. This is the balance shaft kit. And these are balance shaft sprockets, which I'll talk to you about later, but I don't think I'm going to use those. I think I'm going to keep the original sprockets on there, but we'll talk about that later. So let's break down what's in this kit and figure out what we're going to do first to start tearing this down. Okay, so here's the kit from Cloy's. We've got the intake and exhaust solenoids. That one's still in the box, which is the first thing we removed, if you remember. There's a new improved oil nozzle that's supposed to give higher flow rate of oil to the engine at low RPMs. Here are our guides. This is the top one, and these are the 2 side ones. Here's our tensioner, which is the first thing we're going to remove here in a minute. Sprocket, and the new timing chain. Also the big sprockets, the intake and exhaust, big sprockets up at the top. And then here's our balance shaft kit. This came in a separate kit. And remember, I'm working on a 2.0 turbo. So we've got our chain guides and our chain and our tensioner. So let's get started. Start tearing this thing apart. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we need to make sure that our #1 cylinder is at top dead center on the exhaust stroke. So I stuck the harmonic balancer bolt back in here just so we can have something to turn on. And there'll be a key way in this shaft that we need to make sure is at about the 12 o'clock position. So, okay. 12 o'clock, and then we have to make sure that it's on the exhaust stroke. And the only way to know that is to look at our camshaft sprockets. And you can see this mark right here. That one needs to be at the 2 o'clock position, and this one needs to be at the 10 o'clock position, and they are. Keyway at 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 10 o'clock, we're in the right spot. So now we can continue on. Okay, so first thing we're going to remove is the tensioner, which is right here. And it's a 32 millimeter socket. Hopefully it comes off easy. There we go. Now, there's been several designs of these things over the years. This one is the third and last design. You can see on the Cloy's sheet, there's the 3 different designs, and the one we've got matches the one that came in there. There's no O-ring on there, so we have the correct one. Now we're just going to take off this guide right here. It's just got 2 10 millimeter bolts. All right, so next we're going to use a 15/16 wrench on the back side of this sprocket, and then we've got a 18 millimeter on the front side. And these are torque to yield bolts. So once you use Once you take these bolts out, you got to throw them away. The new sprocket comes with new bolts. All right, so once that bolt is out, we're supposed to be able to just pull this off. I don't know if I'm gonna have to get a puller or not, because you still got a lot of tension on this chain. So let's see if it'll, oh, there it goes. All right, so that pops off. Now we should be able to start getting tensioners off. Okay, so you can see our chain just kind of fell down through there once we took that sprocket off. So now let's go ahead and take this bolt off here that holds this guide on. Okay, so there's that guide out. Next we need to remove this plug right here, and that's a 10 millimeter like Allen head bolt. So I've got a socket that'll go in there. So that plug just comes out like that, and remember we're going to replace that with a different thing later. And that gives us access to another 10 millimeter bolt right in there where we can get this other guide out. Be careful that you don't let it fall down in there. I guess you can get to it. And here's the lower one right here. Okay, so there's that guide. And those are the two bolts that are known for causing problems and just working themselves out of that aluminum. And that's what most timing belt issues are, is when that bolt works its way out and either the bolt comes out or the guide comes off or whatever, and that's what causes all the problems. So we're going to put new upgraded stuff in there so that won't happen in another 100,000 miles. Okay, so now we're going to go back up to the top where we're still trying to get the chain out. We're going to use our 15/16 wrench on the back side of this one. You got to make sure that everything stays where it's supposed to stay. You don't want anything moving. Your guide still is at 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock over there. Remember, this bolt is trash now. Cannot reuse it. And hopefully this one comes off as easy as the other one. Yep. Now our chain can just lift out the top. Now the issue I've got is I don't want to move this at all. I want to make sure this shaft stays with the key up. Then remember, I've got my bolt tightened in pretty tight, because I used that to turn the motor over to get top dead center earlier. So if I just put a ratchet on there and try to loosen that up to get this out, I'm going to move something. So I think with my impact, I can jar it enough to make it come out without moving it, but I'm going to wrap a rag around the sprocket so it doesn't cut my hand, and I'm going to hit it short enough burst to see if it will loosen up, and then I'll be able to tell if it moves, which it did not. Okay, so just got to make sure that doesn't move after you get everything where it's supposed to be. So now that bolt came out, and I have a new bolt for that too. We need to get this little sprocket right here off, which I'm sure is on there really tight. So I'm gonna have to get a puller of some sort. And I might stick that bolt back in there just so I can push off the bolt and not mess with that shaft. But okay, so far in this project on the timing chain part, getting this sprocket off is the most difficult. And the only way I was able to do it was I had a steering wheel puller. It's because it's got these little tiny pullers on it. And so I was able to get that in there where they would get right behind those teeth and get it started enough to pull it out a little bit at a time to where I could get a real puller on there, which is what I've got on there now. And it comes off pretty easy right there. So that's definitely the hardest part so far. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is remove this little oil nozzle. Since we started this project, have not put one thing back on the car. We are still removing. That's how involved this project is. Okay, so that will be thrown away because, I don't know about the bolt, but the nozzle will be thrown away because there's a new improved one. It has better oil flow. Now we're going to start removing the rest of the balance shaft components, starting with this tensioner. Now we'll start getting these valve guides off. get this one. Now you see we've got slack in the chain and the top. Okay, so now that we've got the guides out of the way, we should have enough slack in the chain. Hopefully this pulley will come off. All right, so that came off pretty easy once we got it moving. Now we should be able to just get this chain off. And out from around our water pump, finally. So the balance chain is off. Little shaft chain is off. Okay, this would be the time if we were going to change these two balance shaft sprockets, we would do it now. And the way you do it is you put a punch or something in that hole. I don't know if you can see it right there, and then going through the teeth, you line it up, put your punch in there, and then you loosen that nut up and that bolt up, and that'll hold that solid on both sides. I mean, you do the same thing on both sides and get that off and then replace it. I'm going to use the stock ones just because I've heard there could be issues with the replacement ones, so I'm going to keep that. And so now we can go over and start working on that water pump, try to get it out, hopefully in one piece. I don't know if we have to take the cover off or not, but once we get that out, that'll be all of our removal, and we can finally start putting this thing back together. All right, so I've got that out, which is pretty painless. So there's our hole going through there. There is one bolt. There's two going through the back side of it, and then one coming through this front side right here that you got to take out to get it off. This one, if you don't know about it, you're like, why is it still on there? But that's the bolt. They're all 13 millimeter, I think. Here's the old one. And like I said earlier, this one could still be good, but they're known to fail like in the 80,000 mile range. And this one has like 70 something. So I'm gonna go ahead and replace it since we're here. So let's get the new one put in right there. Okay, I should mention I went ahead and cleaned the surface of the motor where this is gonna mount to. And I put a little thin layer of Vaseline, or you can use some kind of little, oil or something. You just want to make sure the gaskets are moist with some kind of something to get a good seal. And let's put this on. Okay, so now I'm going to torque this down to 18 foot-pounds. All right, so we've got our water pump in and torqued. So now we're going to take this thermostat, we're going to take this out. This is the old one. You can see that. Get rid of that. That's still good, but we don't want to put an old thermostat back in since it's so hard to do all this. And we're going to take this gasket off. I've got a new one of those here. We'll clean this up. We'll remove this pipe. Okay, then we'll clean that up, and we'll grease up these O-rings on both sides with Vaseline. Before I put the new thermostat in there, it's a GM thermostat. Before I put that in there and bury it down to where we never want to go back there again, I'm going to take it upstairs and test it. So I'll show you how to do that. All right, so test the thermostat, which I have here, unwrapped it. First thing you got to do is go into your kitchen. Find your wife's best pan, start boiling it, and we'll drop this in when it starts boiling and make sure it opens. All right, so we have boiling water. So let's put some tongs on this thing, put it down in here and see if it opens up. And yes, you can see the light through there. When that cools off, that closes back up. So this thermostat is good. All right, so I've got my new thermostat installed, my new gasket right here, and I've got all this stuff cleaned up. So I'm going to go ahead and lube up all these O-rings and gaskets. Get this installed with the, I think there's 3 bolts that hold this onto the motor. At least get them started and get our pipe in there where it goes. And we got to remember, we got this tab right here that we've got to orient. It goes in like this. And that'll be the easy part. And then the hard part is getting the cap over the thermostat housing cover on. That one bolt in that back side, it takes forever. It's a killer. Let's go ahead and I'll put it on time lapse and we'll get that done hopefully. Right, so I've got all that stuff reconnected finally back there in the thermostat housing, and all the bolts are tight. I do have to put in the sensor there. I'm gonna clean those threads up, put some more pipe dope on there, and then it goes right back into that hole there. I'll get that put in, and then I've got the gasket off of the turbo. Goes behind the turbo. Here's the new one. Put that on, and we'll tighten that up and start putting all these lines on. All right, so I've got the turbo back where it's supposed to go. All the nuts are started on the, and the new gasket's on between that and the exhaust or the manifold. The only way I was able to get it on there was to get this back into the position that I had it when I got it off, which was car jacked up, engine jacked up about 1 inch, and that lets you get enough space to get between this and the frame rail right there to be able to get it on the stud. So I forgot that that's the way it was when I took it off. So I had to jack it back up. Now it's on. Now I need to start tightening everything back up, putting these lines back on. And remember, I have these new gaskets for the lines, and those go over each one of the lines, cooling and oil. So we'll get those put on, and then I'll have to look up the torque settings, and I'll let you know when I torque them down. All right, so I've got the turbo solid on there. Now I'm going to start putting all these return lines in. So I'm going to put the new little weird washer things on there and get them rerouted and tightened up. And also I'm going to put the sensor back into the thermostat housing, which goes to that hole right there. And put some pipe thread sealing compound stuff on there and get that put in. And then we'll move to the next thing. On these bolts here, looking at the torque specs, some of them were saying 89 inch-pounds. I think that is for the mounting bolt, which is just a little old 10 millimeter bolt here. I think these, it said 15 foot-pounds, which I don't have a torque wrench on foot-pounds. It goes down to 15. So I converted that to inch-pounds, and it's 180 inch-pounds. That's what I torqued them to. And now comes the part I've been dreading, and that is getting that cat back in there. So I'm going to get under there and try to figure out how I can turn it and spin it to get it started. Remember, I've got the engine up 1 inch or so. So hopefully there's enough room to get in there and twist it around and at least get it started on the studs. And I think there should be a gasket somewhere in there. Yeah, there's the gasket. I got a new one to replace that. So I'll get that out and swap that. When I had that bracket that went back up underneath there and already had the cat on, you cannot put the bracket on after you bolt the cat on. So I had to loosen all my nuts back off of the cat where I had room to wiggle it around, and then I could get that bracket back up behind there, bolt it on, and then bolt the cat back on. So everything is bolted back in. It has to do with the exhaust, the turbo, cat, everything's all bolted in. The sensors are all in and connected from the exhaust and from the cat and to the thermostat. I got to put these two hoses on right here still, and then we will be back on the timing chain finally. All that was just to get that water pump replaced. All right, so real quick before I get back on the timing chain stuff, I'm going to go ahead and put these two hoses. One I've already got sitting on there. I just need to get the clamp moved down, and then this one I need to put the hose back on, and then we need to put our nut back on our motor mount down there. So I'm going to do all that stuff before I forget about it. Then we'll start back on the timing. All right, so the first thing we have to do, getting ready to, is to install the balance shaft chain, which goes from, this sprocket around our new crankshaft sprocket we're going to put on, this sprocket, and our water pump that we just installed. And each of these is marked. You can see this has an arrow right here. This has an arrow right here. Get that oil out of the way. And then there'll be a mark on our crankshaft sprocket. And then we have a chain that has special colored links. So we've got two black ones here you see, and this one is an off-colored link here. And they correspond to different marks on these different sprockets. So we have to get them all lined up correctly. I guess we'll go ahead and start by putting our sprocket on the shaft. Let's do that first. And then we'll start trying to line up the chain. Okay, so to get that sprocket on there, you got to really make sure that this key does not want to tilt up behind you. It's not just a square keyway key. It's kind of like they used to call a Woodruff key. It's kind of shaped weird on the bottom. It's got a part that goes down lower in there, and so if you get it caught on the first to the front of this as you're driving it in, the back will tilt up and then it won't go any farther. I had to use a big socket like this that would go over everything to get it started and tap it in, and then make sure that key stayed down as I tapped it the rest of the way in. So now we've got that new sprocket where it goes, and we'll start putting the chain on. So we've got to make sure that this sprocket arrow is pointing at 12 o'clock. This one is pointing at 6 o'clock. And then our other link that we put around this sprocket will be at the 6 o'clock spot underneath. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this gasket, because this little piece right here will be in our way of the chain. We have a new one. Let's just get it off there. Now let's start trying to get the chain wrapped around there. So we're going to take our, remember we got two black links here, and then the one that's this off color. We're going to start with it and put it on this shaft here, right over our arrow at 12 o'clock. And then this one should be right at 6 o'clock on the sprocket, which it is. Let's go ahead and wrap it around her. Of course, this chain wants to grab everything. Let's go ahead and get it up there around our water pump. Because the water pump, once you get it on there, it can just spin wherever, it doesn't matter. Okay, so we're on our water pump. This one is on our arrow on that one. This is on our arrow on that one at 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock. Now this one needs to come around here. And it should be at 6 o'clock on there. And it is. Okay, so all those are lined up in the right spot. So that black one is on the arrow on that one at 6 o'clock. This one is at 12 o'clock. It's right on there. And this one down here, very hard to see. You can see the dot, and it's on the black at 6 o'clock. Okay, so now we're going to start installing guides. Here's our guides. And you'll notice there's like a little groove in here. That's where the chain rides. So this is our top one, and it goes in this orientation. So we'll put it in between our chain, line up our holes, and we're just going to get all these started. I'm not going to tighten anything yet. And then the one on the right goes in like this orientation. Okay, and then the one that was broken, it goes like this orientation. And like I said, make sure all the chains are in that little groove on your track. And now we'll just tighten them up a little bit, and I'll check what the torque setting is. Okay, so now I'm going to torque all these to 89 inch-pounds. Remember, that's the inch-pounds, so it's a little bitty torque wrench. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is replace the old oil nozzle. Here's the new and improved one. It's supposed to be a lot higher flow nozzle on it. You know, make sure there's no junk inside this hole right here with old oil, old sludge or stuff like that. So I'm going to, hopefully you can see that. Line that up. And that's another just a little 10 millimeter. So we're going to torque it to 89 inch-pounds again. It just seems like 89 inch-pounds is nothing, but that's the way it's supposed to be. So, all right, so here's our tensioner, otherwise known as the hand grenade. See our pin on there? So we're gonna go ahead and get it started. Same thing, 89 inch-pounds. Right in here, do not pull the grenade until we get it all the way on. Okay, let's get the torque. Okay, so the tensioner's on. Before we pull the pin, we want to check it again to make sure all of our marks are still lined up. That one's good, that one is good, that one is good. So let's pull the pin. Okay, so it put tension on this guide right here. Now it's time for timing chain. First thing is to get our sprocket down there on the crank. Here's the old sprocket that came off. You can see it says front on there, and it's got that little dot down there at the bottom. That's our timing mark. This one doesn't say front or back. This is the new one, but it does have the dot. So we're going to make sure that we can see that, so that comes to the front. All right, so the next thing is our camshaft sprockets, and there are two different ones. You get an intake and an exhaust. This is not marked intake on it that I can see anywhere, but the box that it comes out of, VC106, says intake. And remember, you got to use the new bolts that come with them. Those are torque to yield. And it's the same deal as the chain that we put on the balance shaft. There's a different color link. I don't know if you can tell that's a different color right there or not. And there's two black ones down in there that we're going to use for other areas. But we got to start by lining up our intake sprocket, our timing mark, which is right there. So that goes on that discolored link. We'll line it right up on there, and then we'll get it oriented into, there's a little slot right here, and that stud on the back of there goes in that slot. Okay, so line those up. The most difficult part of this part we're doing now is kind of snaked that chain down through there. You can see there's a casting right there. There's a little bit of space on the other side of that casting, and your chain needs to go on both sides of that casting. So you got to kind of snake it on that one side of it, and then just kind of let it hang down, maybe on both sides of the shaft like that. And then when it falls down in there like it just did, just make sure you got a magnet where you can reach in there and grab it, or just let it all the way fall through like I just did and do it again. You have to snake it back down through there, and anyway, get it to where you can get it on both sides of that casting. All right, so we've got our link right over that timing mark. You can see that. So I'm gonna go ahead and put our bolt in there and just kind of hand tighten it a little bit. And we are making sure it's completely fully seated, and it is in there. So now we need to go ahead and get our guide put in there, and this is gonna go in like this into that hole right there. And this is where we're gonna use our upgraded timing guide bolts. There's two kinds of these. We're going to put links to all these parts in the description. This is the one where they had so much trouble with the old bolts coming loose and the guides coming out, and that's what caused a lot of the problems with these timing chains. So these are an upgraded bolt. They make a hex head one, which is recommended, and they make an Allen head one. The hex head ones were back ordered for a long time, so I went ahead and got the Allen head ones. I'm gonna go ahead and install it, and then we torque it to 89 pounds, inch-pounds. And then these are the two other ones that go on our other guide, but we're only gonna use one of those, and I'll show you why in just a minute. Well, let's get this one installed. Okay, so I think this coming up here is the last kind of real tricky part, getting this done. We've got to get all these timing marks lined up with the chain. So we've got this one, no problem. This one down here, you see that black link is up to the mark there. So, but we've got a ton of slack in this chain right here. So we're going to have to rotate this enough to where we've got slack in the chain over here to where we can move around this sprocket here to get it lined up with that. And we've got, our balance shaft stuff is all lined up, so that won't get out of alignment. And if we get, as long as we keep all these chain links in with the timing marks on their respective sprockets, we can move them around a little bit, as long as we don't, as long as we're just moving them a little bit to get them to all line up. We can't like crank something all the way around or we'll be out of time again, but moving them back and forth just a little bit is okay. And the way we'll move that one is we'll just kind of stick the harmonic balancer back on there enough just to engage this key, so we can move it a little bit, make sure that this is on there, tighten this side up to where we have slack in that chain to get it on our sprocket and get it lined up with this slot and the little stud on the back side of the sprocket. So hope that makes sense. Okay, so that is definitely the most difficult part of the timing chain, is getting all that lined up. That probably took 15 minutes just kind of playing around with it, trying to get the stud and the slot on both of these in, or on this one in where all the links were lined up with the marks. So we've got it. We've got black lined up at the mark, off color lined up at the mark. And then I don't know if you can see it down there, but there's a mark right there. So we are good. So now it looks like we need to try to get this last guide in. And this is the one where the guide goes through, and you can see in there, that's where the guide bolt went. That's the one that there's so much trouble with coming out and causing all the problems. So they've made this new thing that where our old plug was, that was just a plug that went in there. It was an access hole so we could get to the bolt. Now they've made this where it goes in that access hole, but this is the part that goes into your guide. like so. So that's what, there's no chance of a bolt working its way out of that soft aluminum. This is holding that guide in there from the outside. So here's our guide. Here's our new upgraded bolt with that spacer on there, a little bushing. That's going to go in there, and the bottom is going to go in this hole here. So let's slide that up through there. Then we're going to torque that to 89 inch-pounds. Then we should be able to see through the hole. You can see the guide through there, and this is where this is going to go in to hold that. We can get it started, hopefully, and make sure our guide is in there. Okay, this bottom bolt that we put in on this guide is slotted, so you can move it up and down to get this to line up. I got it to line in there, so let's tighten it up. And you can look at it through the top and see that it's going in there. I'm going right in there. Our chain is in our guide slot. Now we'll torque that bottom one to 89 inch-pounds. Okay. And that's the guides. Now we need a tensioner. So I did torque this down to 66 foot-pounds. And now we need to install our tensioner for the timing chain, which is, you'll remember, was the one we took out from up here, like one of the first things we disassembled. And when you put the new one in, it has to be in the deactivated position, which means you can pull this in and out. When it's activated, there's spring tension behind that, and you can't move it. So it has to be installed in the deactivated position. So we'll screw it in, and it gets torqued to 55 foot-pounds. That's 5.5. Okay, so now that our tensioner is installed, we have to, this next part is a little hard to explain. We need to put our harmonic balancer back on just temporarily and get all this, and turn it probably clockwise. We want to get all the slack in our chain on this side of the sprocket, over on this side, so that the slack is where our tensioner is going against the guide in there. See the chain down there on the guide? Well, right behind it, right there, you probably see the edge of that little shiny. That is where the tensioner comes in. Okay, so once we get the slack all onto that side, we want to take a long bar, and I'm going to use a bar with some tape on the end of it, so it's not like going to scratch anything or tear anything. I'm going to push right on that. And I got to push it in about 1/8 of an inch, and it'll release the tension on that tensioner and come back out and put tension on there. So let's get our slack in the chain on that side, and then you'll see what I'm doing. I won't be able to probably show in there while I actually do it, but hopefully it releases and we get the slack out of our chain. All right, so harmonic balancer. All right, now let's turn it clockwise. I'll keep messing with it till I get, like right now, our slack is kind of like right here. I want to keep messing with it till our slack is kind of over here on this side. All right, so I've got it where I can feel some movement in the chain down here on top of that guide. So now I'm going to try to push it in 1/8 of an inch. And I'm going to do a quick check again to make sure all my timing marks are still lined up on all the sprockets on the balance shaft side and the timing side, and they are. All right, so remember, I've got a soft tip on this bar. I'm going to try to push it in 1/8 of an inch, and hopefully that will activate that. I think that did it. Now I'll move it around with a harmonic balancer and see if it feels like the slack is all out. All right, so now that we've got the slack out, as much as I can tell, I think it's activated. It's hard to 100% sure, but looks like to me it is. Now we're going to torque these bolts down, so we'll get our 15/16 wrench put back behind here again, and then we're going to torque this down to 63 foot-pounds. And then it's really supposed to be another 30 degrees past 63 foot-pounds. So let's get our 63. There's that. Now I'm going to go back up to 12 o'clock. And I'm going to, I don't have a way to do degrees, so I know that 45 is going to be about right here. So I'm going to come, just a little bit less than that. It's going to be my 30 degrees. Sorry for you machinists that know how to do this exactly right or have the tools for it. Because we know 90's here, 45's here. So, okay, close to 30. Same thing on this one. Okay, there's my 63. 12 o'clock. Okay. All right, so now we're going to install our new guide. This came in that kit like that. And we're going to torque our bolts to 89 inch-pounds again because they're just a little 10 millimeters. Okay, so that is all of the components, new stuff put back in there. And now what we'll do is get our gasket that goes on this front cover and get ready to put it in. I'm going to go ahead and clean around all the edges of that just to make sure it's nice and, there's nothing in there that can keep our seal from sealing. So we'll clean that up and put our gasket on. And before we put our cover back on, normally, this is kind of a weird setup, but the oil pump is located inside this thing. This piece right here is the cover for the oil pump. So you can see how it turns in there. I want to take that apart and just make sure that there's no little pieces of plastic in there that could get caught up in there that, where our original valve guide broke. I don't know if there's little pieces that broke other than those two main pieces. So I just want to make sure there's nothing caught up in all that can keep good oil flow from going to everything. So I've not seen anything on doing this. I'm just going to take all these screws off and hopefully there's not some kind of seal or something I need to replace once I take that off. It shouldn't be, since it's all just in oil all the time anyway, but I'll take it apart and show you what it looks like. All right, so I've got this oil pump all apart. You can probably see from the video, I took all these screws out. There's a whole bunch of them. They're a T25 Torx bit. And I checked all the passages. I couldn't find any pieces of plastic or anything anywhere. Everything looked really good. You have to remove this plug right from here, and then your little spring and plunger come out. I checked all in there. I don't see anything foreign. So, but while I have it out this far, I want to go ahead and replace the seal that goes around the crankshaft. I've got a new one of those that I bought. That's just like this green thing is just a little spacer that holds it in shape while it's in package. So I'm going to try to pop that old seal out and put the new one in and put this thing back together. All right, so I've got this all nice and clean and all the passages sprayed out. Got my old seal out. So there's where that new one will go. So I'll tap that in, and then we'll start putting this thing back together. All right, so now that we've got our oil pump assembly all back together, and we're sure there's no particles in there. We got our new gasket. We'll go ahead and get the new gasket put on, and then we'll start putting on our cover. All right, so I've got the cover back on, everything's lined up. So now I'm going to torque all these bolts down, and they all go to 18 foot-pounds, and I think that's 216 inch-pounds. And don't forget this bolt right here, which I just put in, that is for the water pump. So that's a 13 millimeter instead of a 10 millimeter like the rest of these, but it's also 18 foot-pounds. All right, so now that's all installed, everything's torqued. So we can go ahead and get our tensioners put back on. There's a little orienting stud on the back of this belt tensioner. This is the drive belt. And if you can see it in there, that's where the little stud goes. So that gets it in the right spot. And then we'll put the smaller one on down there, and it's the same way. All right, so we've got those cranked down. So now we'll go ahead and put our harmonic balancer back on. Torque settings for the harmonic balancer are 74 foot-pounds, and then 125 degrees past that. And remember, you have to use a new bolt. You're supposed to. So I've got that. So let's get that installed and torqued. Okay, so getting the harmonic balancer on is kind of difficult. There's a area that you've got to go through on the oil pump first, which has got two flat sides on both sides of the shaft of the harmonic balancer. So that has to go through enough until you get to where the keyway is on the harmonic balancer. So you get it through those two flat sides first until you feel like you're up almost where the keyway is, and you just turn it around till you feel the key. You'll kind of have to put pressure on it till you can feel where the key is going to go into that key slot, and then you tap it the rest of the way in, where it shouldn't be spinning. It'll spin until you get to that key spot, and then you tap it in. So now I'm going to go ahead and put my bolt in there. All right, so now we've got our new belts here. Drive belt. It has to go around the back side of that. Okay, so you have to have your 3/8 braking bar. And we'll relieve the pressure off of that. Now we can put our power steering belt back on. Okay. Now we'll move back up to the top end, to the valve cover. All right, so let's clean up this valve cover. I'm gonna get all the old oil and stuff out of it and just make sure it's clean. Then we're gonna remove all these old gaskets, which is easy. And put our new ones in there and go from there. All right, so we've got all of our gaskets installed, and the surface of the engine is all clean where these gaskets are going to go. I'm going to go ahead and put this on there. Okay, so now we'll get all of our bolts put in and torqued down to 89 inch-pounds, and there is a particular order that these are installed and torqued, and we'll put the little diagram up on the screen here, and then you can do that. You can pause it if you're doing this. Okay, so our valve cover is installed. Next, we'll go get our coil packs, put them in. And we got to remember to put this little hose that goes to the turbo over here, and there's a bolt that goes into it right there. Make sure we do that. All right, so now we're ready to put in our new solenoids, the VBT valves. And this is the intake, the gray one. So it's going to go in this side. We'll just poke it down in there, get our bolt lined up, tighten that up. And then the black one, the exhaust side, should go over here. Now we need to put on our cover. All right, so all that is buttoned up and reconnected. A couple things we need to do before we try to start it. One is just so I can get to this easily. This hose, I looked when I pulled this back and we've got a rubbed spot right here. I don't know if the belt rubbed on it or what, but it is very thin, so I'm going to replace that hose, and I got it somewhere around here. I want to go ahead and hook this bottom duct that goes to the air box on there, so we can at least get our air box on here so our mass airflow sensor can be connected so it'll run right. And that's another issue here is this duct piece. And if you remember, that piece right there connects to this duct, and that is broken off on this one. And I searched high and low, could not find another one without having to buy a new one, which was $150 for that little duct. So that's on its way, but it should run okay without that being connected right now, as long as we have this sensor right here connected. So I'm just going to stick that on there temporarily. And we're going to run it just for a little bit without coolant in it or without the turbo intercooler connected, just to make sure we don't have some kind of catastrophic failure with the timing or something where everything explodes as soon as we start it. So this is almost the time of truth here. So let's switch that hose real quick and get that duct on there. This ground wire, this thing is like so, and this one is underneath it. Okay, it's about time for the moment of truth. We open up this garage door. We'll go ahead and hook up the battery. Now, a man that is confident in his work goes ahead and replaces everything at once. I mean, he puts the radiator back in, the intercooler, puts all the shielding back on, puts the hood back on, and just starts it up and drives off. So that's why I'm not doing that. Well, that didn't sound good. Okay, boys, I figured it out finally. You gotta have your tube connected to your turbo and an intercooler connected, just so that you got airflow going in and out, or it will not run. So I just stuck that on there temporarily. I didn't even tighten any clamps or anything. So that sounds normal. That little clicking sound is the fuel, high pressure fuel pump. So that sounds like a normal GXP to me, but I'm gonna just let it run for a minute because we don't have any coolant in there. All right, so now it's time to start getting all this stuff put back in the front. I'll get that intercooler taken back off. Probably go ahead and take that pipe off there and the air box back off, and then we'll work on getting the radiator and the fan installed, and then go ahead and try to get the radiator filled up. Get the antifreeze back all through the car. All right, got the radiator, the fan, all that stuff back connected. Hoses are all connected. Fan power is connected. So now I'm going to start filling this thing back up with antifreeze. And I think I'm going to take this hose right here off. I think that's the highest point in the system. So when I start filling up the tank, I'll know when it starts coming out of this. I'll know my everything below it's full. So I've got everything reconnected that I know of, all the lines, wires, the intercooler, tubing, everything is bolted up, tightened up. I've got antifreeze in the system. I'm going to start this thing and let it run for a while and get up to temperature, hopefully, and try to get the air out of the line, and hopefully just let this thing run a while and make sure everything's okay. So I about forgot the air box, so I went ahead and stuck that on there loosely so our mass airflow sensor is connected. All right, so I've got it running. Sounds really smooth. This thing sounds like it's supposed to sound. So now what I'm watching for is that our coolant level starts going down, hopefully getting sucked into the engine, and watching for coolant leaks. You know, we had a lot of stuff unhooked in this whole process, so there's chances for lots of different leaks. All right, so I'm going to end our tutorial on the timing chain water pump swap right here. Everything else is just putting body panels back on, which I'm doing another video on all that. So that's it on the mechanical stuff. Hope you guys, that if you're going through this, I hope this helps you. And if you see anything that I did wrong that could be done better, put it down in the comment section below so that somebody else can learn from it, because this is my first time on all this, so I'm sure I did some things wrong. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode.